The story of America is not a simple tale with a single beginning. It is a complex narrative that spans millennia, encompassing the rise and fall of civilizations, the clash of cultures, and the continuous evolution of a continent. This is a story that begins not with European ships on distant horizons, but with the first peoples who crossed ancient land bridges and built sophisticated societies across two continents. From the Inca Empire in the Andes to the Mississippian culture along great rivers, from the Maya in Central America to the Iroquois in the Northeast, this continent was home to diverse and advanced civilizations long before 1492. Our journey will trace the transformation of this land through contact, conflict, and change. We will explore how European colonization reshaped the continent, how new nations emerged from revolution, and how America evolved into a global power. This timeline represents more than dates and events. It represents the experiences of millions of people, indigenous peoples, colonists, enslaved Africans, immigrants, and citizens, whose lives shaped the American story. We will examine not just the triumphs, but also the tragedies, not just the heroes, but also the ordinary people whose struggles and dreams built a nation. This is American history in its full complexity, a story still being written today. Join us as we embark on this comprehensive journey through America's past, exploring how the events of yesterday continue to shape the nation and world of today. The story of the first Americans begins tens of thousands of years ago, during the last ice age. How did humans first reach the Americas? This fundamental question has shaped our understanding of early human migration and the origins of indigenous civilizations. The leading theory suggests that the first people arrived via the Bering Land Bridge, a massive landmass that connected Asia and North America when sea levels were much lower. This bridge, called Beringsia, existed during the Ice Age around 21,000 years ago. This detailed map shows the possible migration routes taken by the first Americans. The blue arrows indicate the overland route across the Bering Land Bridge, while the red arrows show alternative coastal routes along both the Pacific and Atlantic coasts. Recent archaeological evidence suggests that migration was not a single event, but occurred in multiple waves over thousands of years. Some groups may have arrived as early as 30,000 years ago, while others came much later. Archaeological sites across Western North America provide crucial evidence for these early migrations. This map shows pre-Clovis sites that may represent some of the earliest human presence in the Americas, predating the well-known Clovis culture. These early migrations were not just movements of people, but the beginning of human adaptation to diverse environments across the Americas. From Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, these first Americans developed the foundations for the rich tapestry of indigenous cultures that would flourish across the continent. The story of the first Americans reminds us that human migration and adaptation have been constant throughout history. These early pioneers, crossing vast distances and adapting to new environments, laid the groundwork for thousands of years of indigenous innovation and cultural development that would follow. Across North America, sophisticated indigenous civilizations flourished for thousands of years before European contact. These diverse cultures developed complex societies, innovative technologies, and remarkable architectural achievements that rivaled any civilization in the world. The Mississippian culture represents one of North America's most advanced pre-Columbian civilizations. Centered around the great city of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, this culture dominated the Mississippi River Valley from approximately 1000 to 1500 CE. In the Northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy developed one of the world's most sophisticated political systems. 5 nations, later 6, united under the Great Law of Peace, creating a democratic confederation that influenced the founding fathers of the United States. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi, created remarkable architectural achievements. Their cliff dwellings and great houses, like Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, demonstrate advanced engineering and astronomical knowledge. The eastern woodlands were home to numerous Algonquin-speaking tribes who developed sophisticated seasonal migration patterns and diverse housing structures. These cultures created intricate trade networks and developed advanced techniques in agriculture, hunting, and craftsmanship. These indigenous civilizations created remarkable artistic and technological achievements. From intricate copper work and beadwork to sophisticated pottery and ceremonial objects, their craftsmanship demonstrates both aesthetic mastery and deep cultural significance. By 1492, North America was home to millions of indigenous people living in hundreds of distinct societies. These civilizations had created sustainable ways of life, complex political systems, and rich cultural traditions that had flourished for millennia before European contact forever changed their world. The civilizations of Central and South America developed some of the most sophisticated societies in the pre-Columbian world. The Maya, Aztec, and Inca empires created advanced systems of mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and governance that rivaled any civilization of their time. The Maya civilization flourished in Mesoamerica from 250 to 900 CE during what historians call the Classic period. They developed one of the most advanced mathematical systems in the ancient world, including the concept of 0 centuries before it appeared in Europe. Maya astronomers created incredibly accurate calendars and could predict eclipses with remarkable precision. Their observatory at Chichen Itza, known as El Caracol, demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of celestial movements. The Aztec Empire, centered in their magnificent capital of Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in Lake Texcoco. This engineering marvel housed over 200,000 people and featured an intricate system of canals, causeways, and floating gardens called chinampas. Aztec society was highly organized, with a complex tribute system that supported their empire. Their calendar stone demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of time cycles, while their military prowess allowed them to control vast territories across Mesoamerica. The Inca Empire was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, stretching over 2,500 miles along the Andes Mountains. Their most remarkable achievement was an extensive road system covering over 14,000 miles that connected mountain peoples with lowland populations. The Inca developed sophisticated administrative systems using quipu, knotted string devices for record keeping. Their architectural achievements, exemplified by Machu Picchu, demonstrate their mastery of stone construction and their ability to build in harmony with the natural landscape. These three great civilizations, Maya, Aztec, and Inca, developed independently yet achieved remarkable sophistication in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and governance. Their innovations in agriculture, architecture, and administration supported millions of people and created some of the most impressive cities and monuments in human history. Long before European contact, indigenous civilizations across the Americas developed sophisticated agricultural techniques that sustained millions of people and transformed entire landscapes. In the Andes, the Inca developed terraced farming systems like those at Moray in Peru. These circular terraces created different microclimates, allowing farmers to experiment with crops at various altitudes and temperatures. In North America, indigenous peoples developed the Three Sisters agricultural method, planting corn, beans, and squash together in a symbiotic relationship that enriched the soil and maximized yields. Indigenous civilizations also developed sophisticated systems for recording information and tracking time, demonstrating advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. The Inca used quipu, a system of knotted strings to record numerical data, historical events, and administrative information. These devices could store complex information about taxes, census data, and even narrative accounts. The Aztec and Maya civilizations created incredibly precise calendar systems. The Aztec sunstone represents a complex understanding of astronomy, with interlocking calendar cycles that tracked both solar years and ritual periods. Indigenous architects and engineers created monumental structures and planned cities that rivaled any in the world, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and urban design. Cities like Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, housed over 10,000 people and featured massive earthen pyramids. These urban centers included residential areas, ceremonial plazas, and sophisticated drainage systems. Beyond practical innovations, indigenous peoples developed rich artistic traditions, complex writing systems, and sophisticated spiritual practices that reflected deep understanding of their natural and cosmic environment. These achievements represent thousands of years of innovation and cultural development. By 1492, indigenous civilizations had created sustainable societies, advanced technologies, and rich cultural traditions that would profoundly influence the course of human history. 500 years before Christopher Columbus set foot in the Americas, Norse explorers had already crossed the treacherous North Atlantic and established settlements in what they called Vinland. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, led a Viking expedition from Greenland to the North American coast. These fearless seafarers navigated using primitive instruments and their knowledge of ocean currents and wind patterns. The Vikings established extensive trade networks and exploration routes across the North Atlantic. Their voyages took them from Scandinavia to Iceland, Greenland, and eventually to the shores of North America, creating the first documented European contact with the New World. However, the Viking settlements in North America were short-lived. Conflicts with indigenous peoples, supply difficulties, and the vast distance from Scandinavia led to their eventual abandonment. Their discoveries remained largely unknown to the rest of Europe. By the late 15th century, European nations were desperately seeking new trade routes to Asia. The Ottoman Empire controlled traditional land routes, making spices, silk, and other luxury goods extremely expensive. This economic pressure drove European explorers to seek alternative sea routes. Christopher Columbus, a Genoese navigator, believed he could reach Asia by sailing west across the Atlantic. After years of seeking support, he finally convinced Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain to finance his ambitious voyage in 1492. On October 12, 1492, Columbus and his crew made landfall in the Caribbean, believing they had reached the Indies. This moment marked the beginning of sustained European contact with the Americas, forever changing both continents. Columbus made 4 voyages to the Americas between 1492 and 1504, exploring various Caribbean islands and parts of Central and South America. Each voyage expanded European knowledge of this new world and established permanent contact between Europe and the Americas. The impact of Columbus's voyages was profound and irreversible. They initiated the Columbian Exchange, bringing together 2 worlds that had been separated for millennia. European exploration would soon accelerate, leading to widespread colonization and the transformation of the Americas. By the early 1500s, 4 major European powers began competing for control of North America. Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands each brought different strategies, motivations, and approaches to colonization that would shape the continent for centuries. Spain was the first and most aggressive colonizer. Following Columbus, Spanish conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro conquered vast indigenous empires. Spain's approach focused on extracting wealth, particularly gold and silver, while establishing missions to convert Native Americans to Christianity. France took a dramatically different approach. French colonizers focused on the fur trade and building alliances with Native American tribes. They established trading posts along rivers and waterways, creating a vast but sparsely populated territory called New France that stretched from Canada to Louisiana. England developed the most diverse colonial system. English colonies ranged from Puritan religious communities in New England to tobacco plantations in Virginia and the Carolinas. Unlike Spain and France, England encouraged permanent family settlement and eventually developed 13 distinct colonies with varying degrees of self-governance. The Netherlands, though smaller than the other powers, established profitable trading colonies. The Dutch founded New Amsterdam, which later became New York, and focused on commerce and trade rather than territorial expansion. Their approach was primarily economic, seeking profit through strategic trading posts. By 1750, these different colonial approaches had created a complex map of competing claims across North America. This comparison shows how each power's strategy shaped their colonial territories and relationships with indigenous peoples, setting the stage for future conflicts and territorial changes. When European colonizers arrived in the Americas, they encountered fierce resistance from indigenous peoples who fought courageously to defend their ancestral lands, cultures, and ways of life. Across North America, Indigenous leaders emerged to organize resistance against European encroachment. Leaders like Metacom, also known as King Philip, led coordinated attacks against English settlements in New England during the 1670s. Indigenous resistance took many forms, from direct military confrontation to diplomatic negotiations, strategic alliances, and cultural preservation efforts. These were sophisticated responses to an existential threat. However, the greatest threat to indigenous populations was not warfare, but disease. European colonizers unknowingly brought devastating illnesses like smallpox, measles, and typhus, diseases to which Native Americans had no immunity. The statistics are staggering and heartbreaking. Historical estimates suggest that up to 90% of indigenous populations died from disease in the century following European contact. Entire communities were wiped out. Why were indigenous peoples so vulnerable? Having been isolated from the Old World for thousands of years, they had never been exposed to these diseases. Europeans had developed immunity over centuries of exposure, but Native Americans had no such protection. Beyond disease, direct warfare also took a devastating toll. Indigenous peoples faced European armies equipped with superior weapons technology, guns, cannons, and steel weapons against traditional bows and stone tools. Major conflicts erupted across the continent. King Philip's War in New England, Pontiac's Rebellion in the Great Lakes region, and countless smaller conflicts as Europeans pushed westward, each taking lives and disrupting indigenous societies. The combined impact of disease and warfare was catastrophic for indigenous populations. Entire cultures, languages, and ways of life were lost forever. The demographic collapse was so severe that it fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Americas. Yet, despite these overwhelming challenges, indigenous peoples showed remarkable resilience. Many communities survived, adapted, and continued to resist. Their cultures, though forever changed, endured and continue to this day. This period of indigenous resistance and demographic collapse represents one of the most tragic chapters in American history. Understanding this history is crucial for comprehending how European colonization fundamentally transformed the Americas and its peoples. The Atlantic slave trade fundamentally shaped the economic foundation of colonial America. This forced migration of millions of Africans created a triangular trade system that connected three continents in a web of human exploitation and economic profit. The triangular trade connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a devastating cycle. European ships carried manufactured goods to Africa, where they were exchanged for enslaved people. These captives were then transported to the Americas under horrific conditions, while ships returned to Europe with raw materials like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. The Middle Passage, the journey from Africa to the Americas, subjected millions to unimaginable suffering. Enslaved Africans were packed into shipholds like cargo, with barely enough space to lie down. Disease, starvation, and despair claimed countless lives during voyages that could last months. The majority of enslaved Africans came from West and Central Africa, with Angola being the largest source. European traders established fortified posts along the African coast, working with local intermediaries to capture and purchase people who were then forced into bondage. In the American colonies, enslaved labor became the foundation of agricultural wealth, particularly in the South. Plantation systems developed around crops like tobacco, rice, and sugarcane. These labor-intensive crops required year-round work under brutal conditions. Cotton cultivation, which would later dominate the Southern economy, began to expand in the late colonial period. Enslaved workers possessed crucial agricultural knowledge from Africa, including rice cultivation techniques and ironworking skills that proved invaluable to colonial development. The slave trade created a dehumanizing market system where human beings were bought and sold like property. Slave auctions became common in colonial ports and cities, separating families and reducing people to economic commodities. This system generated enormous wealth for traders, planters, and entire colonial economies. The Atlantic slave trade created lasting consequences that would shape American society for centuries. It established racial hierarchies, concentrated wealth in the hands of slaveholders, and created economic dependencies that would influence regional development, political conflicts, and social structures long after the colonial period ended. By 1763, Britain had emerged victorious from the Seven Years' War, but victory came at an enormous cost. The British Treasury was nearly bankrupt, and Parliament looked to the American colonies to help pay for their own defense and administration. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act, requiring colonists to purchase special stamps for legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards. This was the first direct tax imposed on the colonies, and it sparked immediate outrage. The colonists' response was swift and unified. They argued that as British subjects, they could not be taxed by a parliament in which they had no representation. This principle of no taxation without representation became the rallying cry of colonial resistance. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America. This threatened colonial merchants and led to the famous Boston Tea Party, where colonists dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. These conflicts were not just about money. Enlightenment ideas about natural rights, government by consent, and individual liberty were spreading throughout the colonies. Thinkers like John Locke influenced colonial leaders to question the very nature of British authority. By the 1770s, a distinct American identity was emerging. Colonists increasingly saw themselves not just as British subjects, but as Americans with their own interests and rights. This growing sense of unity and shared purpose would prove crucial in the coming struggle for independence. April 19th, 1775, marked the beginning of armed conflict between Britain and the American colonies. The battles of Lexington and Concord would become known as the shot heard round the world. British forces marched from Boston to seize colonial weapons stored in Concord. Paul Revere's midnight ride warned the countryside, allowing colonial militia to prepare for the approaching redcoats. At Lexington Green, British troops encountered colonial militia. Someone fired the first shot, and the Revolutionary War had begun. The British continued to Concord but faced increasing resistance as they retreated to Boston. The early years of the war saw both sides adapting their strategies. American forces relied on guerrilla tactics and local knowledge, while British forces brought professional military training and superior equipment. American forces faced significant challenges: lack of supplies, inconsistent training, and difficulty maintaining long-term enlistments. However, they possessed advantages in fighting on familiar terrain and strong motivation to defend their homeland. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777 became the turning point of the Revolutionary War. American forces surrounded and defeated British General Burgoyne's army, proving that the Continental Army could defeat professional European forces. This decisive victory convinced France that the Americans could win the war. French support would prove crucial, providing naval power, supplies, and experienced military advisors that the Continental Army desperately needed. In 1778, France formally entered the war as an American ally. The meeting between George Washington and the young Marquis de Lafayette symbolized this crucial partnership that would change the course of the conflict. French naval power challenged British control of the seas, while French military advisors brought European tactical expertise. French financial support and supplies sustained the Continental Army through its darkest hours. The Siege of Yorktown in 1781 marked the decisive end of major combat operations. British General Cornwallis found his army trapped between American and French forces on land and the French fleet at sea. The coordinated American and French siege forced Cornwallis to surrender over 7,000 British troops. This victory effectively ended British hopes of maintaining control over the American colonies. Throughout the 8-year struggle, George Washington's leadership proved indispensable. His ability to maintain army morale during the darkest moments, such as the crossing of the Delaware, kept the revolutionary cause alive. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 formally ended the Revolutionary War. Britain recognized American independence, and the United States gained territory extending to the Mississippi River. The fight for independence had succeeded. 3 extraordinary men emerged as the architects of American independence and nationhood: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin each brought unique talents that proved essential to the revolutionary cause and the birth of the United States. George Washington, born in Virginia in 1732, became the indispensable man of the American Revolution. His leadership of the Continental Army transformed a colonial rebellion into a successful war for independence. Washington's military genius lay not in winning every battle, but in keeping his army together through the darkest hours. His strategic retreats and surprise attacks, like the famous crossing of the Delaware River, kept the revolutionary spirit alive when defeat seemed certain. Beyond military leadership, Washington established crucial precedents as the first president. His voluntary surrender of power after 2 terms set a democratic tradition that would define American governance for centuries. Thomas Jefferson, the brilliant Virginia planter and philosopher, gave voice to American ideals through his masterful writing of the Declaration of Independence. His words would inspire democratic movements around the world. Jefferson's declaration proclaimed revolutionary ideas about human equality and natural rights. His famous words that all men are created equal challenged the very foundations of monarchy and aristocracy that had ruled the world for centuries. As the 3rd president, Jefferson doubled the size of the United States through the Louisiana Purchase and championed individual liberty and limited government. His vision of an agrarian democracy shaped early American political thought. Benjamin Franklin, the eldest of the Founding Fathers, brought international credibility to the American cause. His diplomatic skills, scientific reputation, and political wisdom proved invaluable to the revolutionary effort. Franklin's greatest contribution to independence was securing the French alliance in 1778. His charm, wit, and international fame as a scientist opened doors in European courts that no other American could have accessed. Beyond diplomacy, Franklin was a Renaissance man whose scientific discoveries and inventions earned him worldwide fame. His experiments with electricity, creation of the lightning rod, and numerous civic innovations demonstrated American intellectual capability to skeptical Europeans. Together, Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin embodied the diverse talents needed to create a new nation. Washington provided military leadership and executive precedent. Jefferson articulated democratic ideals, and Franklin secured international support and legitimacy. Their combined efforts transformed 13 separate colonies into a unified nation founded on principles of liberty, equality, and self-governance. These 3 men set the foundation for what would become the world's most enduring democracy. Following independence, the young United States faced a critical challenge: creating a government that could unite 13 separate states while protecting individual liberty. The Articles of Confederation had proven too weak, and by 1787, the nation's leaders knew they needed something entirely new. In May 1787, 55 delegates from 12 states gathered in Philadelphia for what would become the Constitutional Convention. Meeting in secret behind closed doors, these men would spend 4 months crafting the document that would become the foundation of American government. 2 brilliant minds emerged as key architects of the new Constitution. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, came prepared with detailed plans for a new government. Alexander Hamilton championed a strong federal system that could compete with European powers. The Constitution they created established 3 fundamental principles that would define American government. First, the separation of powers divided government into 3 distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each branch would have specific responsibilities and powers. The second principle, checks and balances, ensured that no single branch could become too powerful. Each branch was given specific ways to limit and control the others. Congress could override presidential vetoes, the president could veto laws, and the Supreme Court could declare laws unconstitutional. However, the Constitution faced fierce opposition. 2 political factions emerged: the Federalists, who supported the new Constitution, and the Anti-Federalists, who feared it gave too much power to the federal government and threatened individual liberties. The Anti-Federalists raised a crucial concern. The Constitution lacked explicit protection for individual rights. They demanded a Bill of Rights to guarantee freedoms like speech, religion, and press. This criticism would prove essential to the Constitution's eventual success. After intense debate and compromise, the Constitution was ratified by the required 9 states in 1788. However, the promise of a Bill of Rights was crucial to securing ratification from key states like Virginia and New York. True to their promise, the first Congress proposed 12 amendments to the Constitution in 1789. 10 of these amendments were ratified by the states in 1791, becoming the Bill of Rights. These amendments guaranteed fundamental freedoms that Americans still cherish today. The Constitution and Bill of Rights created a revolutionary form of government, a federal republic that balanced power between national and state governments while protecting individual rights. This framework would guide the United States through centuries of growth, conflict, and change, proving remarkably adaptable to the challenges of a growing nation. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson completed the Louisiana Purchase, acquiring over 800,000 square miles from France for $15 million. This single transaction doubled the size of the United States and opened vast territories for westward expansion. The Oregon Trail became the primary route for westward migration. Between 1841 and 1869, over 400,000 pioneers traveled this 2,000-mile journey from Missouri to Oregon, seeking new opportunities and fertile farmland in the Pacific Northwest. The discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 triggered the California Gold Rush. Over 300,000 people, known as 49ers, rushed to California seeking fortune. This massive migration transformed California from a sparsely populated territory into a booming state. This westward expansion came at a devastating cost to indigenous nations. As settlers moved west, Native American tribes were systematically displaced from their ancestral lands through forced treaties, military action, and government policies designed to clear the way for white settlement. The most tragic example was the Trail of Tears. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the forced relocation of southeastern tribes to lands west of the Mississippi River. Between 1830 and 1850, over 100,000 Native Americans were forced from their homes, with thousands dying during the brutal journey. The scale of land loss was staggering. This map series shows how Native American territories shrank dramatically over time. From controlling vast areas of the continent, indigenous nations were confined to small reservations, losing over 90% of their original territories by the late 1800s. By the 1850s, the United States was becoming two distinct societies. The economic and social differences between North and South were creating an unbridgeable divide that would ultimately tear the nation apart. The North had embraced industrialization, with factories, railroads, and urban centers driving economic growth. The South remained largely agricultural, dependent on cotton plantations and enslaved labor for its prosperity. As these economic differences deepened, a powerful moral movement emerged in the North. Abolitionists demanded the immediate end of slavery, viewing it as a sin against God and humanity that contradicted America's founding principles. The conflict reached a legal crisis in 1857 with the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision. The court ruled that African Americans could never be citizens and that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in federal territories. The decision outraged abolitionists and convinced many Northerners that a slave power conspiracy controlled the federal government. Tensions escalated further when radical abolitionist John Brown launched his violent raid on Harper's Ferry. Brown's raid terrified the South and convinced many Southerners that the North was determined to destroy their way of life. The nation was now divided not just by economics, but by fundamentally different visions of America's future. By 1860, compromise was no longer possible. The conflict over slavery and states' rights had created two incompatible societies within one nation. War was now inevitable. By 1863, the American Civil War had raged for 2 devastating years. President Abraham Lincoln faced the greatest crisis in the nation's history, with the Union's survival hanging in the balance. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, had risen from humble beginnings to lead the nation through its darkest hour. His moral conviction and political wisdom would prove crucial in transforming the war's purpose. Initially, Lincoln's primary goal was preserving the Union, not ending slavery. However, as the war progressed and casualties mounted, he began to see emancipation as both a moral imperative and a strategic necessity. By 1862, Lincoln had drafted a preliminary version of the Emancipation Proclamation. He waited for a Union military victory to announce it, believing this would demonstrate strength rather than desperation. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This historic document declared that all enslaved people in rebellious states were to be forever free. The proclamation was strategically limited in scope. It applied only to states in rebellion, not to border states loyal to the Union. This careful approach maintained support from border states while striking at the Confederacy's economic foundation. The Emancipation Proclamation fundamentally transformed the Civil War. What began as a conflict to preserve the Union became a moral crusade for human freedom. This shift prevented European powers from supporting the Confederacy. African Americans and abolitionists celebrated the proclamation as a crucial step toward freedom. Across the North, gatherings marked this historic moment, though many recognized it was only the beginning of the struggle for true equality. The Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for the complete abolition of slavery. It led directly to the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, which permanently ended slavery throughout the United States. The end of the Civil War in 1865 marked the beginning of one of the most challenging periods in American history: Reconstruction. This era would test the nation's ability to heal its wounds and fulfill the promise of freedom for 4 million formerly enslaved people. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, formally abolished slavery throughout the United States. This constitutional change represented the legal foundation for a new America, but implementing true freedom would prove far more complex. The federal government divided the former Confederacy into military districts, with Union troops stationed throughout the South to maintain order and protect the rights of freed slaves. This map shows the deployment of the 16th Infantry Regiment across multiple states during Reconstruction. The 14th Amendment in 1868 granted citizenship to all persons born in the United States, including former slaves, and promised equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment in 1870 prohibited denying voting rights based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. For the first time in American history, African Americans participated in the political process as voters and elected officials. This scene from Richmond, Virginia shows the historic moment when formerly enslaved people exercised their constitutional right to vote. However, Reconstruction faced fierce resistance. Many white Southerners resented federal intervention and the political participation of African Americans. Political cartoons of the era often depicted the tensions between federal authority and local resistance, as well as criticism of so-called carpetbaggers from the North. Economic challenges plagued the post-war South. With the plantation system destroyed, a new labor arrangement emerged: sharecropping. This system trapped many freed slaves in cycles of debt and poverty, limiting their economic freedom despite legal emancipation. Violence and intimidation became tools of resistance against Reconstruction. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan terrorized African Americans and their white allies. This political cartoon starkly illustrates how some viewed the post-war situation as worse than slavery due to the ongoing violence and oppression. Despite the challenges, Reconstruction achieved significant milestones. African Americans served in state legislatures and Congress, schools were established for freed slaves, and the constitutional foundation for civil rights was laid. However, the end of federal military protection in 1877 marked the beginning of a new era of segregation and disenfranchisement. The end of Reconstruction in 1877 left a complex legacy. While the constitutional amendments remained, their promise would not be fully realized for nearly another century. The era demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of federal power in protecting civil rights, lessons that would resonate through American history. The Industrial Revolution transformed America from an agricultural society into a modern industrial nation. Between 1760 and 1840, revolutionary technologies reshaped how Americans worked, lived, and connected with each other. The steam engine, perfected by James Watt, became the driving force of industrial progress. Watt's double-action engine was far more efficient than earlier designs, providing reliable power for factories and transportation. Eli Whitney's cotton gin revolutionized agriculture in the South. This simple machine could clean cotton 50 times faster than by hand, making cotton production incredibly profitable and unfortunately strengthening the institution of slavery. Samuel Morse's telegraph created the first instant long-distance communication system. By 1844, the first telegraph line connected Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, and within decades, telegraph wires spanned the continent. These technologies transformed manufacturing. The factory system replaced home-based production with centralized facilities powered by steam engines. Workers operated specialized machinery in large industrial buildings, creating unprecedented levels of production. Industrialization drove rapid urbanization as people moved from farms to cities, seeking factory jobs. Cities grew quickly, often without proper planning, leading to overcrowding and poor living conditions for many workers. The Industrial Revolution created enormous wealth for some, leading to the rise of powerful business leaders, often called robber barons. These industrialists built vast fortunes, while workers faced dangerous conditions and low wages, creating new tensions in American society. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed American society. Steam power, mechanization, and new communication technologies created unprecedented prosperity, while also generating new social challenges that would shape the nation's future development. Following the Civil War, America embarked on one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in human history, the expansion of railroads across the continent. This network would fundamentally transform the nation's economy, society, and geography. By 1870, a substantial railroad network already connected the eastern United States. But the next 2 decades would see explosive growth, with thousands of miles of new track laid across the Western territories, shown here in red. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was the crown jewel of this expansion. The Central Pacific Railroad built eastward from California, while the Union Pacific built westward from Nebraska, meeting at Promontory Point, Utah. The impact on transportation efficiency was revolutionary. A journey from New York to Chicago that required 17 transfers and 2 days in 1860 could be completed with no transfers in less than 24 hours by 1870. The railroad boom triggered rapid urbanization across America. Cities became major hubs where multiple rail lines converged, creating centers of commerce, industry, and population growth. American cities transformed into bustling centers of activity. Streets filled with people, horse-drawn carts, vendors, and the constant flow of commerce. Multi-story buildings rose to accommodate the growing urban population. This period of growth coincided with the largest wave of immigration in American history. Millions of people from Europe and Asia sought new opportunities in the rapidly expanding United States. Ships arrived daily at American ports, carrying thousands of immigrants with their belongings and hopes for a better life. Ellis Island in New York Harbor became the primary gateway for European immigrants. On the West Coast, Angel Island served as the immigration station for Asian immigrants, particularly from China. However, these immigrants faced different and often more restrictive policies than their European counterparts. Immigration was not without controversy. Anti-immigrant sentiment grew, particularly against Asian immigrants. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first law to restrict immigration based on race and nationality. Despite facing discrimination and hardship, immigrants made enormous contributions to American society. They provided essential labor for railroads, factories, and farms, while bringing diverse cultures, skills, and traditions that enriched American life. The expansion of railroads, rapid urbanization, and mass immigration between 1870 and 1900 fundamentally transformed the United States. These interconnected forces created the foundation for America's emergence as a modern industrial nation and a land of opportunity for millions seeking a better life. When World War I erupted in Europe in 1914, The United States initially maintained a policy of strict neutrality. President Woodrow Wilson declared that America would remain impartial, stating the nation should be neutral in fact as well as in name. However, events soon challenged American neutrality. On May 7, 1915, a German U-boat torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. The ship sank in just 18 minutes, killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. The final straw came in January 1917 with the interception of the Zimmermann telegram. This secret German diplomatic cable proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico against the United States, promising Mexico the return of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson appeared before Congress to request a declaration of war against Germany. He famously declared that the world must be made safe for democracy. Congress approved the declaration on April 6th, officially bringing America into the Great War. America rapidly mobilized for war. The Selective Service Act instituted a military draft, eventually registering over 24 million men. The famous Uncle Sam recruitment posters appeared everywhere, calling Americans to serve their country. American entry proved decisive. Fresh troops and vast industrial resources reinvigorated the exhausted Allied forces. The American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, played crucial roles in major offensives that ultimately led to German defeat. World War I marked America's emergence as a major global power. The United States had demonstrated its military might, economic strength, and industrial capacity. President Wilson's 14 points shaped post-war negotiations, though the Senate ultimately rejected joining the League of Nations. October 29, 1929, a date that would forever change American history. Black Tuesday marked the catastrophic collapse of the stock market, triggering the worst economic crisis the United States had ever faced. The stock market crash was just the beginning. Banks failed across the nation as panicked depositors rushed to withdraw their savings. By 1933, unemployment had soared to 25%, leaving millions of Americans without work or hope. The crisis extended far beyond the cities. Rural America faced a double catastrophe as severe drought and poor farming practices created the Dust Bowl. Massive dust storms destroyed crops and forced hundreds of thousands of families to abandon their farms. In 1932, Americans elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt as president, hoping for bold action to end the crisis. Roosevelt promised a New Deal for the American people, launching an unprecedented series of federal programs to provide relief, recovery, and reform. Roosevelt's administration created numerous programs to put Americans back to work. The Civilian Conservation Corps employed young men in environmental projects. The Works Progress Administration built roads, bridges, and public buildings while providing jobs for millions of workers. While the New Deal did not immediately end the Great Depression, it provided crucial relief to millions of Americans and began the long process of economic recovery. Unemployment gradually declined, and confidence in the banking system was restored, setting the foundation for America's eventual emergence from the crisis. Following World War II, America entered a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. This ideological struggle between the United States and Soviet Union would define global politics for nearly half a century. The Cold War divided Europe and the world into competing spheres of influence. NATO, led by the United States, faced off against the Warsaw Pact, dominated by the Soviet Union. The nuclear arms race created a terrifying balance of power. Both superpowers possessed enough weapons to destroy civilization, leading to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. The Berlin Wall became the most visible symbol of Cold War division. Built in 1961, it physically separated East and West Berlin for 28 years. While America fought communism abroad, a different battle for freedom was taking place at home. The civil rights movement challenged racial segregation and fought for equality for all Americans. The movement faced violent opposition from those who wanted to maintain segregation. Police brutality and intimidation were common tactics used against peaceful protesters. Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the movement's most powerful voice. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance inspired millions and changed the course of American history. The March on Washington in 1963 brought together over 200,000 people demanding jobs and freedom. It was here that King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. As the Cold War ended, America entered a new era defined by technological innovation, global leadership, and evolving social debates that continue to shape the nation today. Technological innovation has transformed every aspect of American life. From the internet to artificial intelligence, America has led the digital revolution that connects the world. America's global influence extends far beyond military power. American culture, values, and innovations shape societies worldwide, while the nation continues to grapple with questions of equality, democracy, and its role in an interconnected world. From the first migrations across the Bering Land Bridge to the digital age, America's story continues to unfold. The challenges and opportunities of the 21st century will determine the next chapter in this ongoing narrative of democracy, diversity, and the pursuit of a more perfect union.